So I'm the co-founder of Execution Labs, and we're going to dig into some nitty-gritty data and stuff for indie developers, primarily mobile. Who are actual indie developers in the room? All right, great. Okay, everybody. All right, cool. Just for a little context, I want to tell you a little bit about Execution Labs. We're sort of this hybrid incubator, accelerator, early stage investor for indie developers. Chris, who was just before me, was part of the program before. We currently have 6 teams currently in the labs or have recently vacated the labs. We fund teams of very talented game developers who want to be entrepreneurs, want to run their own studios. Typically, they've been often working for another large publisher, have been working for some other game studio, but really want to run their own shop. And we try to give them the power to do that by providing funding, a lot of mentorship, and some other help with analytics and user acquisition and things like that. We're based in Montreal, although I'm based here in San Francisco. We basically, all the teams are 4 or 5 people or so. So, we function as a bunch of different indie studios. So, this data that I'm going to share today should be helpful for you guys as well. At least I hope so. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff in a very short time. So, if I do speed through things, don't worry. Just send me an email and I'll send you the deck, and you can go through the data, at your leisure. So I'll put my email up on the last slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about competitive analysis, soft launching your game, testing it. We're going to spend a lot of time on that actually. We'll talk specifically about how much you can spend while you're testing your game. Platform featuring. A lot of people are curious what that looks like, and we'll share some examples. Revenue. We'll give some of those numbers out. A couple of interesting marketing approaches that we've seen, and one of my favorite topics, testing your icon, which is just a very tactical thing that I like to talk about, if we have time. Okay, I thought it was interesting from Chris's talk before. He talked a lot about sort of thinking about the game and sort of who it was for before they started building it, and I think that's a critical exercise that most indies sort of forget about. They have an idea and they just want to go build it. And actually, now this has become a more and more rigorous part of our program, the competitive analysis that you have to do before beginning development work. I can spend a lot of time on this, but if you think of the App Store as sort of the genres as different sort of the different categories are sort of slices of a pie, and you see the ones that everyone's participating in, like all the Clash of Clans clones or whatever. That's a very big slice of the pie right now. But people see money's being made there, so your tendency may be to pile in there and try to do something. But I would caution you against that as an indie, because chances are you're going to be competing against larger, more funded developers and publishers. On the other hand, if something is really small and like super niche, particularly if it's your first game, super niche is fun and interesting, but it's probably too risky for you as an indie. Like later on you can take some chances and do something, but try to do something that has some traction in the market. So be original, but don't be so original for your first game. But there's a sort of a systematic way you can go about looking at this, and this is by using Distimo or App Annie and trying to find games that are sort of similar to the ones you plan on building and seeing which ones did well, right? You can see which games are in the market and were performed well from, in the grossing charts, right? That's fairly easy to see. So go through that exercise, but actually the hard part of this exercise is finding the games that are similar to the one you plan on building and seeing which ones failed horribly, because those don't really show up on the charts, right? Like they're not easily visible. So you really have to dig into the subcategories and find games that are sort of like yours, and see, why did this game do well and why did it perform poorly? So this is an analysis by one of our teams, Kit Fox Games. This is actually just a very small piece of their analysis, but you can get a sense, right, that they're really looking at different games, figuring out, why the press liked it, why players liked it, or why the press hated it, or why players hated it. And so this is something that I think every indie ought to start with before they start development. So sort of marketing 101. So that's sort of all the fluffy stuff, and then we'll start talking about some numbers. So The data is all coming from 5 games. These games are all either launched globally or in soft launch. So we have MacGuffin Quest, which was the first game to come out of Execution Labs, followed very closely by Big Action Mega Fight by Double Stallion Games. MacGuffin is sort of a mid-core dungeon crawler, and I know we can have a whole other panel on what mid-core means, but Big Action Mega Fight, or BAMF, is casual to mid-core brawler, and then Shattered Planet, it's the one I just mentioned by Kickbox Games, is a roguelike. It's an exploration RPG, pretty hardcore. Order of Souls is sort of a true RPG, which is actually launching globally tomorrow on iOS. And Winter Forts, which is a city builder with some PvP and with some cool tower defense stuff. So these are the games that I'm going to be drawing on for the data today. Oops, that's the wrong way. And just so you know, that all the data I'm going to show you today is coming from either Flurry or from the ad networks that we use. So this is data that you as an indie could have access to, and it's it's free. So do that if you can. And also, as always, when I do these kind of talks, I like to thank Lucien Chiret, who is our Director of Business Intelligence, and who helps me with these presentations and helps me pass myself off as somewhat informed. So thank you in absentia, Lucien. Okay, so you'll read a lot about install prices in the press, and it's super scary. So the idea here is that you read a lot in the press about how much installs cost, and the good news is, even though this is super scary, it doesn't really pertain to you. Because most of the stuff that you see in the press is really numbers reported by large publishers and large studios, and they're playing in a different field. They're like playing a whole different ball game than you are. So you can ignore this. There's various reasons why these prices are inflated, but I'll actually share with you what your actual costs will look like. One of the things that we learned very quickly, and you mentioned this earlier in your talk, is that when you're testing your game, Southeast Asia is a great place to go. So the title of the slide is Southeast Asia is the New Canada, and the reason I say that is because it's sort of common knowledge that if you're doing free to play, and most of our games are free to play, that you soft launch in Canada, right? But the problem is everyone soft launches in Canada, so that means things are expensive there. So we work off very small user acquisition budgets, almost all of which is spent during our testing phase. And as an indie, I'm a big believer that you are much better spending your limited funds in your testing phase while you're in soft launch as opposed to post-global launch. The amount of money you're going to be able to muster to spend on user acquisition post-launch is not going to have a meaningful impact on your game's performance. You're much better getting everything tuned just right before you launch, right? So that's where our focus is. So right away, when BAMF launched, this was back in the fall, we saw using Chartboost that Indonesia was a great, great cheap place to buy users on iPhone, and it was even more pronounced on iPad. If you look at, you can buy nearly 3 users for the cost of 1 user in Canada, and this is super useful, right? If you're an indie and you can find places to do this. One thing to keep in mind is that Southeast Asia is great for your testing of your game early, seeing when people come in, when they come out, how often they return. It's not useful for monetization, right? So, the spending habits are wildly different than they are from Western users, but you don't really care about that at the beginning anyway. You're just trying to see how people interact with the game. Southeast Asia, using that as a broad term is a bit unfair because there are a lot of different countries in Southeast Asia, and we've had various luck in different markets. We've tried a bunch of them. So we've tried Singapore, we've tried Vietnam. Philippines has been very good for us recently. This data is just a couple weeks old, so this is from Winter Forts, and we're buying users for 60 cents or so a piece in the Philippines on Android, which and these users, also a cool thing about launching, this game's actually being developed simultaneously on iOS and Android. I highly recommend, if you can, even if you're going to launch on iOS first, to test on Android. One, because you can iterate so much quicker, but also because the users actually give you feedback that you can respond to in the dev console. So Philippines has been great so far for Winter Forts for a testing ground. Yeah, Southeast Asia, also the new Australia. If I can give you one piece of advice that you remember about testing your game is do not test your game in Australia. And the reason is because everyone started in Canada and it got expensive, and then everyone went to Australia, which has even fewer people. And so, like in New Zealand, same, yeah, exactly. And so the costs are crazy. And so, I mean, you should, at the end of your testing cycle, find some Western market to test your game in before its global launch. Try not to pick Australia. We started at the very beginning when some of our early games, and we tried Australia, and I said, we're never doing this again. It's too friggin' expensive. And then we did it again anyway, just to see what would happen. And so now, once again, it's too friggin' expensive. And this is for the Order of Souls, abbreviated TOOS here. One of the reasons it's super expensive is because it's a super hardcore game, and the more hardcore game you're, the narrower your audience goes on Facebook. So the costs are going to go higher, right? So even in the Philippines, costs are relatively high for a hardcore game. The other thing. Well, let me talk about Shattered Planet. Let me back up just for a second, because I've sort of started diving into costs and stuff, but just a little bit more on our thinking of how we're approaching our soft launches. So as I said, our focus on our UA budget is definitely during the soft launch phase, because we just don't have the budget to spend a bunch post-launch. And we're looking for at least 300-400 installs a week to get statistical significance on our data. Fewer than that, you don't know if your data is lying to you or not, right? So you need a certain volume of installs. So basically what we do is we put the game in a market, we see if it's going to get organic installs, and if it doesn't, then we sort of make up the difference with our user acquisition spend, right? So Shattered Planet, this was the roguelike. We had to buy a fair amount of installs for iOS, but not too terribly many. On Android, we really didn't have to buy many installs at all. It was getting plenty of organic users, so we didn't really have to spend much money. So over 3 months, we spent less than $4,000 for all of our testing for this game. So this is on 2 platforms. But the Order of Souls, totally different ballgame. So this is the hardcore RPG that we tested in Australia also. We made a sort of a mistake, and sort of maybe it was sort of development being behind in development, but we launched on tablet only, even though it's now a universal app, and that really drove up costs if you're trying to buy just for tablet users, and it's crazy expensive, right? This game was in soft launch for a long time, and we spent about $8,000, right? Which is still not a huge sum of money, but for an indie, every penny counts, right? So this is just for iOS, by the way. So don't launch in Australia, don't launch as a tablet-only game. One of the things you need to be aware of is that the paid users you acquire during soft launch can behave very differently than your organic users. So this is looking at Chartboost installs for Shattered Planet. And we noticed we were tracking these users through Flurry's free attribution tool, which you can do with Chartboost. And we noticed that the Chartboost users they dropped off much quicker than the paid users, right? So keep in mind that, one, you have to really know where your users are coming from before you can sort of start making assumptions about how they're behaving in your game. I don't know, see, this is why I need my notes. The second thing is if something happens in your game, like you start to see behavior, changing or whatever, it could, and you think, oh, I broke something in this last update or something happened. That may not be the case. It could simply be that your mix of paid and organic users has changed in some meaningful way, right? And so therefore, the behavior in the game is looking funky. It's also important to note that your paid users aren't necessarily worse. In fact, often we're finding your paid users that you acquire during your soft launch phase actually are better players and more engaged than the ones that find the game organically, right? They've clicked on an ad on Facebook and they're into it and they like it. So this chart basically shows you have organic Facebook and Chartboost, and the retention rates for both of the paid ad networks actually were better than the organic users that came in. So again, attribution is important. This is for Big Action Megafight. I don't want to pick on Chartboost specifically, but I am just for a second. We like Chartboost. We use them for a lot of stuff, but their network tends to be very, very casual. So with BAMF, we were able to get some good users for cheap on Chartboost. Became very hard for Shattered Planet. With Order of Souls, we basically gave up after a week because the game is just too hardcore. So keep in mind that the more hardcore your game, the ad network you choose is going to be tough. So baseline fallback on Facebook, it works pretty darn well. Another assumption is that Android is cheaper to buy than iOS, and we found that is often not the case. Oftentimes we found that Android is more expensive than iOS. So looking at BAMF Canada, our users cost more on Android. Same thing on Shattered Planet. So, I think a lot of people just sort of have this notion that buying users on Android is going to be cheaper, but you really have to test to know, all right? So when you're budgeting, don't make that assumption. I've spent a lot of time talking about our soft launch strategy. Very quickly, I wanted to just tell you how we think about things post-launch. So we do try to reserve some money for post-launch, but it's not for bursting up the charts. What we're actually trying to do is we're trying to find pockets of spending users, right? And one of the ways that we'll do that is by using different creatives, targeting different people for the same game, right? So this is MacGuffin Quest, same game. We did one set of creative that was targeting hardcore fans of Diablo, which you can do very easily on Facebook, and then one that was a sort of more adventure game fans, very casual user base on Facebook. And so we changed the copy, we changed the creative, and we ran these at different times to see if the users that came in behaved differently. So that's how we spend our money post-launch, not on trying to sort of just blindly sort of burst up the charts. I know that the holy grail for a lot of indies is being featured by Apple and or Google, and so far we've been pretty lucky. We've gotten a lot of attention from both Apple and Google, and I wanted to show you what that sort of looks like. So this is iOS, and this is showing the first 4 weeks of featuring by Big Action Megafight and Shattered Planet. So BAMF was the first one to get featured, and it was only featured on the iPad. It was featured in a lot of places, but the iPad sort of homepage it was featured on, but not iPhone for some reason. Even though I think the game actually fits better on the small screen, but whatever. So we still, it got 15 or so thousand installs a day at launch, which is pretty cool. And then Shattered Planet, when it launched, it got featured sort of everywhere, and it was peaking at maybe 35,000 installs a day. Now this is a roguelike, right? It's a hardcore game, so if you're doing a casual game and you get featured, you can maybe get twice those numbers, right? But you can see that very quickly, you get, so what tends to happen is you get featured, the main featuring the first week. The second week you still get some pretty cool featuring in some different stores and stuff like that. And then by the third week, so the gravy train is over, and either your game is viral or it's not, right? And a lot of indies, and it sort of worries me that a lot of indies think, well, if I can just get in front of Apple, if you're doing a free-to-play game, that's often not enough, right? Because you can see that the fall-off is very, very fast. And this is what it looks like on Google, right? So this is Shattered Planet. It got featured in both. It launched roughly the same time on both platforms. Google is a little different. They like your game to be live globally for a little while before they feature it, versus Apple, they want it to be sort of first day. And you can see, so, as I said earlier, Shattered Planet got like 35,000 installs day one, but then the drop-off is very quick. But on Google Play, it was more like 5,000, then 6,000, 10,000, and that happened for a longer period of time. And then the drop-off is more gradual. I think this is more just a function of the algorithm that Google Play uses. But, I mean, the bottom line here is the area under the curve is basically the same for both, right? So the total volume of installs, roughly the same. This could sort of change based on the genre of your game. But again, the key point to remember here is unless your game is viral and or you have a ton of money to throw at user acquisition or have a publishing deal in place or something, chances are your game is not going to sort of just stick and remain in those top charts. So a couple of interesting marketing things I want to talk about before we wrap up. So Banff was a free-to-play game, and it's a brawler. And the game was out for a while, and the game wasn't making much money, at less than $25,000 or so. And so the team really thought about it, and they sort of had heart-to-heart conversations, and decided that the game really was not meant to be free to play. It should be better as a premium game. It is more of a genre sort of thing. Like the genre just seems to work better for premium. So they switched. They did a test version for Kindle or Kindle Fire, and they launched it as a premium version, and they got some downloads, but everyone seemed to really like it as a premium title. So they then said, okay, we're going to relaunch this thing as a premium game, and they did. And what I bring it up, I mean, they made more money when they relaunched it because they got refeatured by Apple. They made more money the first week of refeaturing as a premium game than they did for months as a free-to-play title. But it's also, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because they got a lot of press for this. And there was a time not too long ago when I would tell any indie that the only way to possibly have success in mobile would be to do a free-to-play title. I now sort of concede the fact that sometimes doing premium on mobile, you probably have just as good a chance to succeed as you do as free-to-play. Those chances are still very, very low. But I think the press and a lot of core players out there are sort of, they want premium games on mobile now. So this is something new. So this is something that I would really think hard about as an indie who's thinking about, should I do free to play and should I sort of build up this whole, sort of service model. Let's see, how much time do I have? Okay, a few more minutes. Okay. We have another game that I mentioned, Shattered Planet. They also have a premium version of the game, but they always planned to have a premium version of the game. So this is a roguelike. It's a sci-fi exploration game, and those tend not to do very well on mobile. But they sort of hedged their bets, and they decided what they were going to do is actually launch on mobile first as a free-to-play game, and sort of use that as a marketing platform for their Steam launch. And we had no idea how this was going to work. So what they did is they got featured by Apple and Google, and they started putting ads for their Greenlight campaign in the mobile version. And it usually takes games about 90 days to get greenlit. It took them 8. They got a ton of traffic to their Steam page from the mobile version. And I thought this was really interesting. And because usually, it's reverse, right? People do a premium version and then they do a mobile version. So this is sort of reverse windowing. And I think this is a tactic that other indies ought to explore, especially if you're working on your first game. And so the financial results, they spent a couple months as free to play. They made about $40,000. And the first 2 weeks, they made $45,000 on Steam. So this is a game that could end up potentially making hundreds of thousands on Steam that started as a mobile title. So this is sort of gives me hope for indies who want to pursue sort of this interesting strategy. Couple minutes left. And this is a topic that I like to talk about because my first job in gaming was in console. And so we used to test the heck out of our packaging, right? Because back then it was like, oh, your package really needs to stand out on the shelves on Best Buy or Walmart or wherever it is. And it occurs to me that most mobile developers don't test their icons, even though the Apple or Google storefront is essentially the same thing as a shelf at Walmart or Best Buy or whatever. So we said, okay, we're going to start testing icons. And when we did this at first, we used banners, and The results were pretty bad, meaning all the click-through rates for all the banners were exactly the same statistically. So we said, okay, we're going to try something else. And then we like really cleaned up the banners, and we like moved the icon over that we wanted to test, and we're like, this is going to work, but in fact, it didn't work at all. Click-through rates were exactly the same statistically. So this is what we do now. We use Facebook ads, really freaking ugly Facebook ads, but it seems to work. And what we do is we take the icons we want to test and we put them on a black textured background. And then we use control images and control copy, so everything else is the same. You don't want to put too much copy because you don't want people really responding to like too much like prompting. It's like, do they like the icon or not, right? So when we first did this with BAMF, we tested these two icons, and they had statistically identical, click-through rate, which is pretty low. And then these two on the right, I guess, yeah, on the right. And they were both statistically higher, meaningfully. And so that left us with two icons we knew were performing better than the other two, and we ended up picking the mustachioed hero brick. And so we've refined this a bit, and so now we just finished this with the Order of Souls, but with Shattered Planet, just to show you, we started with 6 icons. We did the first test, and this dude was horrible at 0.8. And then we eliminated him. We had 2 more that were the worst the bad performers. We removed them. Then we landed on these 3 that had basically the same click-through rate. And so at that point, we were able to essentially take the one that we liked the most as sort of the one that was most on brand, the most original. But a lot of people through soft launch, it was that little crab guy was the icon. So this was about $150. Right? And every time we do this, it's about $150. Right? So if I were you and I was trying to stand out in a very crowded field, I would spend $150 and test my icon on Facebook. So there you go. That guy's name is Zach, by the way. Okay, so we have maybe a few minutes?
Yeah, like 2 questions.
2 questions. So sorry. It's a good thing I didn't have my notes because I probably would have gone even longer. So here's my information. If anybody wants these slides, email me and I'll send you the deck. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. If anybody has any? Yes, please.
On the icon test that you just showed, the previous slide, one of the things that I saw that was most different was just the background color around the actual character.
Yeah.
And the one you used orange as a background color, and pretty consistently in direct marketing they talk about red and orange are really highly effective at driving action. I wondered if that had more to do with the background color and less to do with the actual character.
Well,
why that one was the highest.
Well, it may in round 3, these percentages are all statistically identical based on the number. Yeah, you do a little analysis and you can figure out it's 1.7 is the same as 1. So those are all performed exactly the same. But you may well be right. I don't know about the orange thing, but that's a good tip. Yeah.
Do you suggest doing any, during the testing phase, doing any like pricing tests and things like that? Tests or for IP and things like that? I mean,
sure, if you can. So that's sort of when you launch towards the end, when you're in a Western country and you can actually, or wherever your target country is. So yes, absolutely try to do that. But the tools available for indies that enable you to do that easily are, wow, they're not easy to come by, right? So getting statistical, meaningful data on that, I think, is tough for most small teams. And so unless you have some framework for doing that already, you may not have time. Yeah, question right here.
I might have missed it in the beginning, but you said you heavy up on the soft launch budgeting market, save a little bit post-launch, use that for a little A/B testing afterwards and refinement. Is that all your market? So except for a little A/B testing later, you do no additional marketing?
Yeah. So the question is, do we do no additional marketing after global launch? And in a sense, that's true. We don't have we do have pools of money set aside, small amounts of money for doing additional user acquisition post launch, but it has to be ROI positive spending, right? So we have to have the game in the market. We have to have positive metrics on the users, and so the games that I showed you in both examples were not performing well enough in our test post launch to warrant post launch spending. So there you go. Yes.
You talked about one of your games that was free to play and then you went premium. How did you actually
You said you relaunched it. Is there a different SKU? Or
yeah. So the question is right. So the question is, how do you relaunch a free-to-play game as premium? On iOS, you can do it simply as an update. On Google Play, you have to submit a different SKU.
I see.
Yeah.
You can change the price on the update.
That's correct. That's correct. Okay. Sorry, guys, we're out of time, but thank you so much.